Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Three in the morning. It's always 3 in the morning when I wake up hearing those sounds again. My new house is over 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park, but still, I still hear them. My wife says they're just nightmares. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw that October night. My name is Caleb Thorne, and I need to tell someone this story. It's been 6 years since I left my job as a forest ranger and moved here to Nebraska. People ask me why I left the Pacific Northwest for flat farmland, why I traded those ancient forests for endless cornfields. I tell them I wanted a change. I don't tell them the truth, that I can't look at a tree line without my hands shaking, that the sound of wind through branches makes me reach for a weapon that isn't there anymore. I worked at Olympic National Park for 3 years. 3 years walking those trails, breathing that moss-thick air, thinking I understood what wilderness meant. The Olympic Peninsula is like nowhere else in America. Temperate rainforest so dense you can disappear 20 feet from a main trail and never be found. Trees older than Christ tower overhead, their canopy so thick that noon feels like twilight. In autumn, when the fog rolls in from the Pacific, the whole forest becomes a living thing, breathing and shifting around you. That's where it happened. October 2019. The Iris Kellerman case. I need to back up. I need to explain why this case mattered so much to me, why I couldn't just follow protocol and wait for the county search and rescue team. See, I was the rookie ranger on our district team. 29 years old, 6 months on the job, still trying to prove I belonged there. My supervisor, Ranger Martinez, had 30 years under his belt. He'd seen everything: lost hikers, bear attacks, hypothermia cases, suicide attempts. Me? I had a forestry degree and 6 months of training that taught me everything except what it really felt like when someone's life was in your hands. Iris Kellerman was reported missing on October 15th, a Tuesday. She was a graduate student from the University of Washington, studying old-growth forest ecosystems. 23 years old, brown hair, about 5'6", last seen heading into the Hoh River area to collect soil samples for her thesis. Her advisor called it in when she didn't return to her research station by Sunday night as planned. I took the initial report. Professional, by the book. When did you last see her? What was she wearing? Did she have proper equipment? Standard questions. But when I looked at her photo, something twisted in my gut. She reminded me of my sister Emma, who died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Same age, same determined smile. Same way of looking straight at the camera like she was ready to take on the world. Martinez assigned me to the preliminary search while we waited for the county team. Just do a basic sweep of the main trails, he said. Don't go playing hero, Thorne. Mark anything unusual and report back. I should have listened to him. The Hoh River area where Iris was working is some of the most remote terrain in the park. Miles of old-growth forest broken by rushing streams, ravines that drop into blackness, and game trails that twist through undergrowth so thick you need a machete to make progress. In October, the autumn rains turn everything into a slippery maze of moss and mud. The trees, Sitka spruce, western hemlock, Douglas fir, some of them 8 feet across and 300 feet tall, create a cathedral of green that swallows sound and light. I started my search at dawn on Wednesday, October 16th. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own feet, rolling in off the Pacific like something alive. Washington autumn isn't like autumn anywhere else. Instead of crisp air and falling leaves, you get this constant dampness that seeps into your bones, this green twilight that makes noon feel like dusk. The temperature hovers around 45 degrees, cold enough to kill you if you're wet and can't get warm, but not cold enough to shock you into action. My equipment that morning: standard Park Service radio, backup handheld GPS unit, emergency beacon, first aid kit, 3-day food supply, weather-resistant flashlight with extra batteries, and my service weapon, a Glock 22 that I'd qualified with but never drawn in the field. Everything checked out during my morning equipment test. Radio had clear contact with base. GPS showed solid satellite lock. Flashlight beam was strong and steady. The first sign something was wrong came around 10 a.m. I was following Iris's documented research route, checking the GPS coordinates she'd submitted with her research permit. I found her first soil collection site exactly where it should be, a small clearing about 2 miles up the Ho River Trail, where she'd been studying mycorrhizal networks in old-growth root systems. There were her equipment markers, her labeled collection bags, even her field notebook in a waterproof case tied to a tree. But no Iris. The notebook was what bothered me. Every page filled out in meticulous detail, soil pH measurements, moisture content, root density observations. The last entry was dated October 12th, 3 days before she was reported missing, which meant she'd been out here longer than anyone thought. I radioed base. Thorn to Park Service Dispatch. I'm at the Kellerman research site. Found her equipment, but no sign of the missing person. She was here at least 3 days longer than reported. Static answered me. Not unusual in that terrain. The canopy interferes with radio signals. I tried again, adjusting frequency. More static, but underneath it, something else. A sound like breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing that didn't match the rhythm of my own. I clicked off the radio and listened. The forest around me had gone completely silent. No bird calls, no insect noise, no small animals rustling through the undergrowth. In 3 months of working these trails, I'd never heard silence like that. Even in the deepest wilderness, there's always some sound. Wind through branches, distant water, something. This was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I checked my GPS, still locked on satellites, showing my position accurately on the digital map. But when I looked at the paper topographic map in my pack, something was off. According to GPS, I was exactly where I should be. According to the terrain around me, I was somewhere else entirely. The creek that should have been 50 yards to my north was nowhere to be seen. The ridgeline that should have been visible through the trees was missing. Equipment malfunction. Had to be. I'd read about GPS units giving false readings in heavy canopy. I folded the GPS unit away and relied on my compass and paper map, basic navigation skills they'd drilled into us during training. That's when I found the first footprint. It was pressed deep into the soft earth beside a massive Douglas fir, about 30 yards from Iris's research site. A boot print, size 11 or 12, with a distinctive tread pattern, military style, not hiking boots. The print was fresh, maybe a few hours old based on how cleanly the edges held in the damp soil. Iris wore size 7 hiking boots. I'd checked her equipment list. I followed the trail of prints, marking my route with orange flagging tape so I could find my way back. The prints led deeper into the forest, away from any established trail. Through undergrowth so thick I had to push branches aside to follow. Whoever made these prints knew exactly where they were going. The spacing was even, the direction purposeful, the route chosen to avoid the worst of the undergrowth while staying completely hidden from any main trail. After half a mile, the prints stopped. Not gradually, not because the terrain changed. They just stopped, like whoever was making them had vanished into thin air. I stood there in that green twilight, surrounded by trees that had been growing since before Europeans set foot in North America, and felt the first real fear of my career. Not the healthy caution they'd taught us in training, not the respect for wilderness dangers that keeps rangers alive. This was something else. This was the fear that comes when you realize the rules you learned don't apply to the situation you're in. I tried the radio again. Nothing but static, and underneath it, that breathing sound. Deeper now, like something large moving through thick air. My watch read 11:30 a.m., but the light filtering through the canopy felt like late afternoon. The fog had thickened, turning the forest into a series of gray-green chambers that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Shapes moved in my peripheral vision, shadows that could have been falling branches or could have been something else entirely. I decided to return to Iris's research site and call for backup. Whatever was happening here was beyond a rookie ranger's skill level. I followed my orange flagging tape back through the undergrowth, but when I emerged into what should have been the clearing where I'd found her equipment, I was somewhere else entirely. The trees were wrong. The terrain was wrong. Even the moss growing on the trunks had a different pattern. I checked my compass. It spun wildly before settling on magnetic north, then spun again. The needle couldn't find a consistent reading. I pulled out my GPS unit and powered it on. Searching for satellites flashed on the screen, then no signal found. In terrain where I'd had perfect reception 20 minutes earlier, I was suddenly cut off from the outside world. That's when I heard Iris calling for help. Her voice came from deeper in the forest, faint but unmistakably human. "Help me, please. Someone help me." Young woman's voice, higher pitched than normal with fear or cold. It had to be her. I pushed through the undergrowth toward the sound, pulling my flashlight from my belt even though it was still daylight. The beam cut through the fog in a narrow cone, showing me twisted branches and moss-covered logs, but nothing else. Iris Kellerman, this is Park Service. Keep calling so I can find you." Her voice came again from a different direction. "Over here, I'm hurt, I can't move." I changed course, fighting through a tangle of ferns and fallen branches. The ground underneath was soft and treacherous, covered in decades of decomposed leaves that gave way under my boots. I nearly fell into a hidden creek, caught myself on a vine maple that bent under my weight. "Keep talking, Iris, I'm coming to get you." Silence. Then from yet another direction, "Help me, please." I stopped. Something was wrong with her voice. The pitch was right, the words were right, but there was something underneath them, something that didn't quite match, like someone doing a good impression but not quite getting it perfect. I clicked on my radio again, hoping for any kind of signal. Static filled the air, and underneath it, that breathing sound again. But now I could hear it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the forest around me. Something was watching me. I drew my weapon for the first time in my career. The Glock felt heavy and unfamiliar in my hand, but the weight of it was reassuring. I had 17 rounds and 2 spare magazines. Whatever was out there, I wasn't completely helpless. "This is Ranger Thorne, Olympic National Park," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm armed, and I'm here on official business. If someone is injured, identify yourself and your location." The breathing sound stopped. For a moment, the only sound was my own heart hammering against my ribs. Then, from directly behind me, close enough that I should have heard footsteps. "Help me, Ranger, I'm so scared." I spun around, weapon raised, finger on the trigger. Nothing. Just trees and fog and shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. That's when I understood I wasn't conducting a search and rescue operation anymore. I was being hunted. I backed against the nearest large tree, a western hemlock with a trunk thick enough to provide cover, and tried to think. Someone was out here. Someone who knew the forest well enough to move without making sound, who had equipment sophisticated enough to jam GPS signals and interfere with radio communications. Someone who was using Iris Kellerman's voice to lure me deeper into the wilderness. Which meant Iris was either dead or being held prisoner. Either way, I was the only person who might be able to help her, and I was lost in unmarked terrain with a predator who knew exactly where I was. I checked my watch. 12:15 p.m. I'd been in the forest for less than 3 hours, but it felt like days. The light was fading, even though sunset wasn't for another 5 hours. The fog was so thick now I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. I needed to get back to the main trail, back to areas where my radio might work, back to backup and proper equipment. But every direction looked the same in the fog. The compass was useless, the GPS was dead, and the orange flagging tape I'd used to mark my route had vanished. That's when I saw the light. A single bright beam cutting through the fog about 50 yards ahead, sweeping back and forth like someone searching. It had to be another ranger. Maybe Martinez had sent backup when I didn't check in on schedule. "Over here!" I called out, keeping my weapon ready but lowered. "Ranger Thorne, I'm over here." The light stopped sweeping and focused directly on me. Brilliant white LED beam that turned the fog around me into a glowing tunnel. I couldn't see who was holding it, but the light was steady and professional grade. "Thank God," I muttered, and started walking toward it. The light began moving away from me slowly, staying just at the edge of visibility, leading me somewhere. I followed, grateful to have any kind of guidance in the maze of trees and undergrowth. My boots squelched in the soft earth, branches caught at my jacket, but I kept the light in sight and followed. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the light stopped. I pushed through a final screen of ferns and found myself in a small clearing I didn't recognize. The light clicked off, leaving me in sudden darkness. "Hello?" I called out. "Who's there?" My flashlight beam swept the clearing and stopped on something that made my blood freeze. A makeshift camp. Military-style tarp stretched between trees, camouflage netting, equipment that looked like it belonged to special forces rather than park service. And hanging from a rope between two trees, like a trophy, was a park service radio. My radio. The one that had been clipped to my belt. I reached for my belt. The radio was gone. I hadn't felt it being taken, hadn't heard the clip being opened. Somehow, while I was following that light through the forest, someone had gotten close enough to take equipment off my belt without me noticing. That's when I heard the slow clapping behind me. I spun around, weapon raised, and my flashlight beam illuminated a man standing at the edge of the clearing. Tall, maybe 6'2", wearing military surplus camouflage that blended perfectly with the forest. His face was painted with green and black stripes, but I could see enough to know he was older than me, maybe 45, with the kind of lean muscle that comes from years of physical training. "Outstanding, Ranger," he said, his voice calm and conversational. 3 hours and 47 minutes from first contact to arrival at the kill zone. That's actually pretty good for someone with your level of experience. "Where is Iris Kellerman?" I demanded, keeping my weapon trained on his center mass. "What did you do with her?" He smiled, and even in the dim light I could see his teeth were perfectly white and straight. "Military dental work. Iris is fine. For now. She's been very helpful in understanding park service protocols. Amazing how much information people will share when they think it might save their lives." "You're under arrest," I said, though I had no idea how I was going to enforce that with no radio, no backup, and no way to navigate back to civilization. "Put your hands where I can see them and get on the ground." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass in the quiet forest. "Oh, Ranger, you still think this is a law enforcement situation? You still think your training applies here?" He took a step forward, and I saw he was carrying something in his right hand. Night vision goggles. Military grade, probably worth more than my annual salary. "Stop right there," I said, finger tight on the trigger. "I will shoot you." "No, you won't," he said, and took another step forward. "Because you're a good person, Caleb. That's your weakness. Good people hesitate. Good people look for alternatives. Good people give their enemies time to act." He knew my name. I hadn't told him my name. "You see, I've been watching you for weeks," he continued, circling slowly to his left, forcing me to track him with the weapon. "Learning your patterns, your routes, your response times. You're very predictable, Ranger. Every Tuesday and Thursday, you take the morning shift. Every time there's a missing person report, you volunteer for the preliminary search. Every time, you go out alone because you're trying to prove yourself worthy of this job." My hands were shaking now, not from fear. Well, not just from fear, but from the realization that this wasn't a random encounter. This had been planned. I had been specifically targeted. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I figured out some kind of plan. 3 years, he said. "Ever since I was discharged from the Army. Medical reasons, they said. Post-traumatic stress, they said. But there's nothing wrong with my stress responses, Ranger. My stress responses are perfectly adapted to this environment." He gestured at the forest around us with his free hand. "This is perfect hunting ground. Hundreds of square miles of wilderness, minimal law enforcement presence, and a steady supply of prey that walks right into the kill zone carrying their own supplies." "Prey," I repeated. "Hikers, campers, researchers like your friend Iris?" His smile widened. "Rangers." My radio crackled from where it hung on the rope. Static filled the air, and then I heard my own voice. "Thorne to Park Service Dispatch. I'm at the Kellerman research site." He had recording equipment. Professional grade by the sound of it. "I've been having conversations with your dispatcher all day," he said. "Your voice reporting that the search is proceeding normally. that you haven't found anything significant, that you're extending the search area. They think you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. The implications hit me like a physical blow. No one was coming to look for me. No one knew I was in trouble. As far as the Park Service was concerned, I was conducting a routine search that would probably take several days. "What do you want?" I asked. "What I want," he said, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, "is to see how long you last." Iris lasted 18 hours before she started talking, started telling me all about Park Service protocols, radio procedures, equipment specifications. She was very cooperative once she understood the situation. What situation? The situation where I already know everything about you, and you know nothing about me. The situation where I have night vision and you have a flashlight with about 4 hours of battery life left. The situation where I know every trail, every creek, every cave in a 50-mile radius and you can't find your way back to the parking lot. He was right. I had no idea where I was, no way to call for help, and no chance of finding my way back to safety in the dark. My flashlight would die long before dawn, leaving me blind in terrain he knew better than his own backyard. "But I'm feeling generous tonight," he continued. "So I'm going to give you a head start, 60 seconds to get as far from this clearing as you can. After that, I'm going to hunt you down like the amateur you are." "I'm not running," I said. "I'm arresting you for kidnapping and—" The sound that came from his throat wasn't quite human. It was something between a growl and a laugh, a sound that raised every hair on my body and triggered instincts older than civilization. 55 seconds, he said, and pulled the night vision goggles over his eyes. I ran. I crashed through the undergrowth like a panicked animal, branches tearing at my clothes, roots catching my boots, the beam of my flashlight dancing wildly ahead of me. Behind me, I could hear him counting down. 45, 40, 35. The forest had become a maze of obstacles designed to kill me. Every fallen log was a trap waiting to break my ankle. Every low-hanging branch was positioned to catch my throat. Every creek was a pit that could swallow me whole. The fog turned everything into gray shapes that shifted and moved in my peripheral vision. "Time's up, Ranger." His voice came from directly behind me, close enough that I should have been able to see him. But when I spun around with my flashlight, there was nothing there. He was using the night vision to track me while staying outside my light beam. I kept running, trying to put distance between us, but I could hear him moving through the forest with impossible silence. No breaking branches, no footsteps in the soft earth, just the occasional rustle of fabric against bark that let me know he was still there. My lungs were burning, my legs were cramping, and my flashlight beam was already noticeably dimmer. I had maybe 3 hours of light left, and then I'd be blind in terrain where he could see perfectly. I needed to find shelter, somewhere I could defend, somewhere he couldn't approach without exposing himself. I remembered from my training that the forest was full of natural caves and overhangs, places where ancient rock slides had created shelter. If I could find one of those, I might be able to wait until dawn. But first, I had to lose him. I clicked off my flashlight and stood perfectly still, listening. The darkness was absolute, a blackness so complete it seemed to have physical weight. I could hear my own breathing, my own heartbeat, the distant sound of water running over rocks. And underneath it all, almost too quiet to notice, the sound of someone else breathing. He was close, maybe 20 feet away, maybe closer, moving carefully through the undergrowth, probably using the night vision to track my heat signature. I waited until I heard him take another step, then moved as quietly as I could in the opposite direction. Without light, I had to feel my way tree by tree, testing each footstep before committing my weight. It was agonizingly slow, but it was the only way to move silently. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I risked turning on my flashlight for just a second, long enough to get my bearings. I was on the slope of a steep hill, surrounded by old-growth cedar that blocked most of the fog. Above me, maybe 50 yards up the slope, I could see the dark mouth of what looked like a cave. I clicked off the light and started climbing. The slope was treacherous, covered in loose rocks and slippery moss. Every step was a gamble that could send me sliding back down the hill or worse, create enough noise to give away my position. I climbed by feel, finding handholds on tree roots and rock outcroppings, testing each grip before trusting it with my weight. Halfway up the slope, my foot dislodged a rock that went clattering down the hill. The sound echoed through the forest like a gunshot. "There you are," came his voice from below, closer than I'd expected. "I was wondering where you'd gone." I abandoned stealth and scrambled up the remaining distance to the cave entrance. It was larger than it had appeared from below, a crack in the rock face about 6 feet wide and 8 feet tall. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the interior. The cave extended back about 20 feet, before narrowing to a passage too small for a human to follow. Perfect. One entrance, solid rock walls, and a narrow field of fire. I positioned myself at the back of the cave with my weapon trained on the entrance. Whatever happened next, he'd have to come to me. "Caleb," his voice called from outside, conversational and friendly. "That's a good position you found. Defensible. I'm impressed. Most people just keep running until they collapse." I didn't answer. No point in giving away my exact position inside the cave. "You know, I've studied your file," he continued. "Caleb Thorne, age 29, forestry degree from University of Washington, graduated with honors. 6 months as a park ranger, excellent performance reviews, recommended for permanent position. Parents deceased, one sister deceased in automobile accident 2 years ago. Currently dating Sarah Mitchell, nurse at Olympic Medical Center." My blood went cold. He knew about Sarah. "Oh yes," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "I know all about pretty Sarah. Auburn hair, green eyes, works the night shift at the hospital, lives alone in that little house on Pine Street, very trusting, leaves her doors unlocked most of the time." "You stay away from her," I called out, and immediately regretted revealing my position. "That depends entirely on you, Ranger. See? I have what you might call an insurance policy. If I don't check in with my associate by dawn, Sarah's going to have some very unwelcome visitors." He was lying. Had to be. This was psychological warfare designed to make me do something stupid. "You don't believe me," he said. "That's understandable. Let me provide some proof." My radio crackled from wherever he'd taken it, and I heard Sarah's voice. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I don't understand what's happening." She sounded terrified, confused, hurt. It was her voice, definitely her voice, but there was something wrong with the quality. Too much echo, like she was in a large space. "Sarah!" I shouted. "Sarah, can you hear me? Caleb? Oh God, Caleb, is that you? There are men here. They said they'd hurt me if I didn't cooperate. They said you were in trouble." "It's going to be okay," I called out, though I had no idea how it could possibly be okay. "Just do what they say, don't fight them." "How touching," came his voice again. "Young love. It's beautiful, really, but also very useful for motivation." I realized I'd been played. While I was trying to rescue Iris Kellerman, he'd been positioning assets to control me. This whole thing, the missing person report, the hunt through the forest, even finding this cave, it was all part of a larger plan. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to understand something, Ranger. I want you to understand that all your training, all your equipment, all your procedures and protocols, they're useless against someone who understands the real rules of survival." "What rules?" "The rule that says predators always win against prey. The rule that says intelligence beats strength. The rule that says the person willing to do anything will always defeat the person who has limits." I heard movement outside the cave, the soft scrape of equipment against rock. He was getting closer. "You see, Caleb, you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. You think this is about law and order, about right and wrong, about protecting innocent people. But this is about evolution. This is about natural selection. You're insane." "Am I? I've been living in this forest for 3 years, taking what I need, eliminating threats to my territory, and not one person has even suspected I exist. I've killed 17 people in that time, Ranger. 17 people who thought they understood wilderness survival." My hands were shaking again. 17 people. And I was about to become number 18. The authorities blame it on accidents, he continued. Bear attacks, falls, hypothermia, getting lost. Amazing how many ways people can die in the wilderness when someone with the right skills wants them dead. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that when you die tonight, it won't be because you weren't brave enough or smart enough or well-trained enough. It'll be because you were prey, and I'm a predator. It's nothing personal. I saw movement at the cave entrance, just a flicker of motion in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. He was positioning himself for an assault. "Last chance, Ranger," he called out. "Walk out of that cave with your hands up and I'll make it quick. Stay in there and I'll have to get creative." I didn't answer. I kept my weapon trained on the entrance and tried to think. He had night vision, superior knowledge of the terrain, and apparently backup that was holding Sarah hostage. I had a handgun with maybe 15 rounds left and a flashlight that was getting dimmer by the minute. But I also had something he didn't expect. I wasn't going to run anymore. The attack came without warning. Something rolled into the cave, a small canister that hissed and began filling the space with thick, choking smoke. Military-grade smoke grenade designed to disorient and blind. I held my breath and kept my weapon trained on the entrance, but I couldn't see anything through the smoke. That's when he came through the entrance. Not from the front, where I expected him, but from above. He'd climbed the rock face and dropped down from the cave ceiling, landing behind me before I knew he was there. I spun around, trying to bring my weapon to bear, but he was already inside my guard. The fight lasted maybe 10 seconds. He moved like someone who'd spent years learning how to kill people quickly and efficiently. Military combatives, probably special forces training. I managed to get one shot off. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined space, but I was firing blind through the smoke and hit nothing but rock. Then he had my wrist, applying pressure that made my hand go numb and forced me to drop the weapon. A knee to my solar plexus doubled me over, gasping for breath. Something hard hit the back of my head, and the world went gray around the edges. When the smoke cleared, I was on my knees with my hands zip-tied behind my back. He stood in front of me, completely calm, not even breathing hard. My weapon was in his hand, already field-stripped and useless. "Like I said," he told me, "predator beats prey every time." He dragged me out of the cave and down the hill to another clearing I hadn't seen before. This one was larger, with more permanent-looking structures. Canvas shelters stretched between trees, storage containers that looked like they'd been there for months, and in the center, a metal cage just large enough for a person to sit in. Iris Kellerman was in the cage. She was alive, but barely. Dehydrated, exhausted, probably hypothermic. Her research clothes were torn and dirty, her hair was matted, and there were bruises on her face and arms. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with something that might have been hope or might have been despair. "Iris," I said, "are you hurt? Are you okay?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. "She's been very helpful," he said, shoving me toward a tree at the edge of the clearing. Told me all about park service procedures, radio protocols, search patterns. Amazing how cooperative people become when they understand their situation. He secured me to the tree with rope and more zip ties, professional restraints that I had no chance of breaking. Then he stood back and looked at both of us like a rancher examining livestock. "Now," he said, "we wait for dawn. I have one more call to make." He pulled out a satellite phone, military grade, the kind that works anywhere on Earth, and dialed a number. After a moment, someone answered. "It's me," he said into the phone. "Package secured. Proceed with phase 2. A pause, then. "No, 2 packages. The Ranger showed up as expected." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood. Dawn timeline remains unchanged." He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Your girlfriend has about 6 hours to live, Ranger. Unless, of course, you can figure out how to get free, navigate through 50 miles of wilderness in the dark and reach her before my associate gets bored." "Please," I said. "Let her go. This is between you and me." "No, Caleb. This is between me and everyone who thinks they're safe in my territory. Sarah is just motivation to make sure you understand how helpless you really are." He walked over to a storage container and pulled out what looked like a small camping stove. But when he lit it, the flame burned with an odd greenish light that hurt to look at directly. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, holding up a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. I didn't answer. "It's a psychoactive compound derived from certain mushrooms that grow in these forests. The indigenous peoples used it in ritual ceremonies. Very interesting effects. Causes hallucinations, paranoia, complete dissociation from reality. In the right dosage, it can make someone believe they're seeing and hearing things that aren't there." He began heating the vial over the strange flame. "I've been using it on hikers for years," he continued. "A few drops in their water supply and they start seeing things, hearing voices, getting lost even when they know the trail. Makes them easy to track, easy to control." The implications were staggering. All those missing persons cases, all those accidents where experienced hikers just wandered off trails and disappeared. He'd been drugging them, turning their own minds against them. "But you, Ranger, you're getting the full dose. I want to see what happens when someone completely loses their grip on reality in the middle of the wilderness." The liquid in the vial was beginning to bubble. Whatever it was almost ready. That's when Iris spoke for the first time. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The key. Under the water dish." He spun around, furious. "Shut up," he snarled, and kicked the cage hard enough to rattle the metal bars. But I'd seen what she was pointing at. There was a metal dish of water near the cage, probably put there to keep her alive. And underneath it, barely visible in the dim light, was something small and metallic, a handcuff key. He turned back to his chemical preparation, muttering about ungrateful prisoners. The vial was boiling now, filling the air with a sweet, cloying smell that made my head feel light. I had to act now, while he was distracted, while I still had my full mental faculties. The tree I was tied to was old-growth cedar, maybe 4 feet in diameter, with bark rough enough to provide friction. If I could work the zip ties up and down against the rough bark, maybe I could weaken them enough to break free. I started sawing the plastic restraints against the tree trunk, trying to be as quiet as possible. The bark was like sandpaper, rough enough to slowly wear through the zip ties, but it would take time I didn't have. He was preparing to inject the drug into a syringe now, holding the vial with a pair of metal tongs. The greenish flame cast dancing shadows across his face, making him look like something from a nightmare. "This is going to be fascinating," he said, not looking at me. I've never had the opportunity to observe the full psychological breakdown in a controlled environment. Usually my subjects wander off into the forest and I find their bodies weeks later. The zip ties were starting to fray. I could feel individual strands of plastic breaking, but it wasn't fast enough. He was almost finished with his preparation. "Caleb," Iris whispered again, so quietly I almost missed it. "The knife, on his belt. Left side." I looked and saw it, a military combat knife in a tactical sheath positioned where I might be able to reach it if I could get close enough. But first I had to get free from the tree. He turned toward me with the syringe, holding it up to check for air bubbles. "Any last words before we begin the experiment, Ranger?" "Yeah," I said, and snapped the weakened zip ties with one sharp pull against the tree bark. "Go to hell." I launched myself at him before he could react, driving my shoulder into his midsection and sending us both crashing into the camping equipment. The syringe went flying, landing somewhere in the darkness beyond the fire. He was stronger than me, better trained, but I had desperation on my side. I managed to get my hand on the knife handle and pull it from the sheath before he threw me off and rolled away. "You just made this much more interesting," he said, coming to his feet with fluid grace. He pulled another knife from somewhere, this one larger than mine, with a serrated edge that gleamed in the firelight. We circled each other in the small clearing. He moved like a professional, knife held low and ready, feet positioned for quick movement in any direction. I held my weapon like they'd taught us in basic training, but I'd never actually fought anyone with a blade before. "You know you can't win this," he said, feinting left and forcing me to react. "I've killed people who were actually trained in combat. You're just a forestry graduate playing dress-up. He was right, but I didn't have a choice. Even if he killed me, maybe I could distract him long enough for Iris to escape. Maybe I could at least make some noise, attract attention from other campers or rangers who might be in the area. He attacked without warning, a lightning-fast thrust aimed at my ribs. I managed to parry with my own blade, but the impact sent shockwaves up my arm. He was incredibly strong, and he knew exactly what he was doing. The fight that followed was nothing like the movies. It was desperate, ugly, and over quickly. He had all the advantages: skill, experience, and weapons training that I couldn't match. But I had something he didn't expect. I wasn't fighting to win. I was fighting to buy time. Every time he came at me, I gave ground, moving toward the cage where Iris was imprisoned. If I could get close enough, maybe I could cut her free before he finished me off. He figured out what I was doing and tried to cut me off, but that put him slightly off balance. I managed to slash at his knife hand, opening a cut across his knuckles that made him drop his weapon. For a moment, we both scrambled for the fallen knife. I got there first, but he kicked me in the ribs hard enough to crack something, and I went down gasping for breath. When I looked up, he was standing over me with both knives, breathing hard but still very much in control. "Impressive," he said. "You actually drew blood. Most people don't manage that." He raised the larger knife, preparing to finish it. But before he could strike, the forest around us exploded with light. Helicopter searchlights cut through the fog like laser beams, turning night into day. The sound of rotor blades filled the air, and I could hear voices shouting through megaphones. "This is the FBI. The area is surrounded. Drop your weapons and get on the ground." He looked up at the helicopters, then back at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "How?" he demanded. "How did they find us?" I managed to sit up, still gasping from the kick to my ribs. "Because I'm not as stupid as you think," I said. "Every Park Service radio has an emergency beacon that activates when it's tampered with. You've been broadcasting our location for the last 6 hours." It was a lie. I had no idea how they'd found us, but the expression on his face made it worth it. The helicopters were landing now, their downdraft whipping the trees and scattering the fog. I could see tactical teams rappelling from the aircraft, moving toward our position with military precision. He looked at the approaching agents, then at me, then at Iris in the cage. For a moment, I thought he was going to surrender. Instead, he grabbed the satellite phone and ran for the tree line. "Stop!" I shouted, but he was already disappearing into the forest. The tactical teams were still 100 yards away, too far to intercept him. I stumbled over to Iris's cage and started working on the lock with the combat knife. The key she'd mentioned was indeed under the water dish, a small handcuff key that fit the cage lock perfectly. "Are you okay?" I asked as I helped her out of the cage. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. "Sarah," she whispered. He said something about Sarah. My blood went cold. In all the chaos, I'd forgotten about his threat to hurt her if he didn't check in by dawn. It was almost 3 a.m. now, which meant we had maybe 3 hours. The first FBI agent reached us just as I was helping Iris to her feet. He was wearing full tactical gear, including night vision goggles and body armor. "Ranger Thorne?" he asked. "I'm Agent Morrison, FBI. Are you injured?" "I'm okay," I said. "But there's a woman in town, Sarah Mitchell." He said he had people watching her, that they'd hurt her if he didn't check in by dawn. Morrison spoke into his radio, calling for immediate protection for Sarah. Then he turned back to me. "We've been tracking this guy for 2 years," he said. "He's killed at least 23 people across 4 states, always in national parks, always making it look like accidents. You're the first person to survive direct contact with him. How did you find us?" "Your girlfriend called it in, Sarah Mitchell. She said you'd told her you were working a missing person case, but when she called the Park Service to check on you, they said you'd never radioed in. She convinced them to activate your emergency beacon. Sarah had saved us. Somehow she'd known something was wrong and taken action." "Is she safe?" I asked. "She's fine. We had units watching her house as soon as we realized what was happening. No one ever approached her." It took me a moment to process that. But he played a recording of her voice. She sounded terrified. Morrison shook his head. Voice synthesis technology. Military-grade stuff. He could make anyone sound like they were saying anything. The whole thing with Sarah had been psychological warfare, designed to control me, to make me act irrationally. And it had worked perfectly. They found his camp the next morning. 3 years' worth of equipment, supplies, and trophies from his victims. Maps of national parks across the western United States, detailed surveillance notes on park rangers and regular visitors, and a journal that documented every kill he'd made. But they never found him. The manhunt lasted for weeks. FBI, Park Service, local law enforcement, even military units trained in wilderness tracking. They found evidence of his presence. Footprints, abandoned campsites, equipment caches, but always days or weeks old. He'd vanished into the wilderness like smoke. Some people think he died out there, that the forest finally claimed him. Others believe he's still out there, still hunting. I get reports sometimes, missing persons cases in national parks that sound familiar. Same patterns, same methods, same impossible disappearances. I quit the Park Service 3 weeks later. Couldn't handle the forest anymore. Couldn't trust the shadows between the trees. Sarah and I moved to Nebraska, as far from wilderness as we could get. Wide open spaces where you can see for miles in every direction, where there's nowhere for monsters to hide. Iris recovered physically, but like me, she never went back to the forests. Last I heard, she was teaching environmental science at a community college in Phoenix. We don't talk about what happened. There's nothing to say that hasn't already been said in therapy sessions and FBI debriefings. But I still wake up at 3 a.m, hearing sounds that aren't there. Footsteps in dry leaves, branches breaking under careful weight, the whisper of fabric against bark. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear him calling my name. People ask me sometimes what the worst part was. Was it the hunt through the forest? The psychological torture? The certainty that I was going to die? No. The worst part was realizing that everything I'd believed about the wilderness was wrong. I thought the forest was dangerous because of bears or cliffs or getting lost. I thought the greatest threat was the indifference of nature. But nature isn't indifferent. Nature doesn't set traps or manipulate your equipment or study your routines for weeks before making its move. Nature doesn't take pleasure in fear. The greatest threat in any wilderness isn't wild animals or natural disasters. It's other people. People who understand that in the deep woods, far from civilization and witnesses, they can become anything they want to be. And some people, when given that freedom, choose to become monsters. I think about that sometimes, here in Nebraska, where the horizon stretches unbroken to the edge of the world. I think about all the missing persons cases that get blamed on accidents, all the bear attacks and falls and exposure deaths that might be something else entirely. I think about the fact that he's still out there somewhere, still hunting, still perfecting his methods. And I think about the next rookie ranger who's going to get a missing person report, who's going to volunteer for the preliminary search because they want to prove themselves worthy of the job. I hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they're more careful. I hope they never have to learn what I learned in those Olympic forests 6 years ago. That the most dangerous predator in any wilderness walks on 2 legs, carries military-grade equipment, and knows exactly how to make you disappear forever. But mostly, I hope they never have to find out how thin the line is between civilization and savagery, between safety and terror, between being the hunter and being the prey. Because once you cross that line, once you understand what human beings are really capable of when they think no one is watching, you never sleep quite the same way again. The forest remembers everything, and so do I. Final word count, approximately 6,800 words. 3 a.m. It's always 3 a.m. when I wake up hearing those sounds again. My new house is over 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park, but still, I still hear them. My wife says they're just nightmares. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw that October night. I'm recording this because my therapist says it might help. Says I need to get it out of my system completely. 3 years later and I still can't. Look, I know how this is going to sound. I know people will think I'm making this up or that I lost my mind out there, but I need someone to know what really happened to Nora Whitfield, what happened to me, and what's probably still happening in those woods. My name is Ethan Cornelius. I'm 29 now, living in Vermont where the forests are smaller, gentler, where you can see the edges. The mountains here are old and worn down, nothing like the towering, impenetrable wilderness of the Olympic Peninsula. I chose this place specifically because it's as different from Washington as I could get while still staying in America. The seasons here are predictable. The winters are harsh but honest. Nothing hides in these woods that shouldn't be there. I was a forest ranger for 6 years before that October, started right after college with a degree in forestry, and what I thought was a good understanding of wilderness survival. Olympic National Park was my first and only assignment. Nearly 1 million acres of temperate rainforest, alpine meadows, and rugged coastline. I loved it, thought I understood it. The thing about the Olympic Peninsula that people don't realize is how easy it is to disappear there. The Hoh rainforest gets over 12 feet of rain a year. The canopy is so thick that even in daylight, some areas exist in perpetual twilight. There are valleys in there that haven't been properly mapped, old-growth trees that have been standing since before Columbus. The undergrowth is so dense you can be 10 feet from someone and never see them. It's beautiful and terrible at the same time. I was good at my job, really good. I knew the trail systems, the weather patterns, the behavior of the wildlife. I could track a lost hiker through terrain that would challenge a bloodhound. I'd been involved in dozens of search and rescue operations, and I'd never lost anyone. Not permanently. That was my pride, my professional identity. I was the guy they called when things got complicated. October 15th, 2021. That's when everything started normal, just like any other missing person case. Nora Whitfield, 34, marine biologist from the University of Washington. She'd been conducting research on mycorrhizal networks in old-growth forests, basically studying how trees communicate through underground fungal connections. Smart woman. Really smart. She'd been camping alone at a research site about 8 miles into the Hoh River Trail, in a section where the forest gets so thick you need a flashlight at noon. Her research partner called it in when she missed their scheduled radio check-in. She was supposed to report every 12 hours, and she'd never missed one before. The last contact was October 13th at 6 p.m. By the time we got organized for a search, she'd been missing for over 36 hours. I remember thinking it was probably nothing serious. Solo researchers sometimes got caught up in their work, lost track of time, or maybe equipment failure. Radio batteries died, something simple. The weather had been cooperative, temperatures in the mid-50s during the day, low 40s at night. Challenging for someone unprepared, but Nora had extensive backcountry experience. My supervisor, Dale Westbrook, assigned me to lead the initial search. It was just me and Park Ranger Melissa Kovich starting out, with instructions to call for backup if we didn't locate her within 24 hours. Standard protocol. I was confident we'd find her at her research site, probably embarrassed about the fuss. We started hiking in at dawn on October 16th. The trail to her research area was familiar territory for me. I'd walked it probably 50 times over the years. But that morning felt different from the moment we entered the forest. The usual sounds were wrong, too quiet. In a healthy rainforest, you should hear birds, small mammals moving through the undergrowth, the drip of moisture from the canopy. Instead, there was this oppressive silence, broken only by our footsteps on the wet trail. Melissa noticed it too. She was newer to the park, only about 2 years on the job, but she had good instincts. About 3 miles in, she stopped and looked around. "Where are all the birds?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. In my experience, that kind of unnatural quiet usually meant a predator nearby. A bear, cougar, something that had spooked the local wildlife. But it was too widespread, too complete. We kept moving, but I found myself checking over my shoulder more than usual. The first sign of real trouble was at mile marker 6. We found Nora's backpack hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. Not on the ground where it might have fallen, not hidden, displayed. hanging from a loop on a branch that someone would have had to climb to reach. The pack was intact, everything still inside. Her research notes, carefully bagged to protect them from moisture. Her emergency gear, whistle, first aid kit, emergency food. Her backup radio still functional. Even her wallet with cash and credit cards. Nothing missing that we could identify. Why would she hang her pack up there? Melissa asked. I didn't know. It didn't make sense. If you're trying to protect your gear from animals, you hang it higher and farther from the trunk. This was almost like someone wanted us to find it, like a marker. That's when I called it in to Dale, reported that we'd found her gear but not her, and that something felt off about the scene. He authorized expanded search protocols and said he was sending in 2 additional rangers with emergency medical equipment. They'd meet us at the research site. Nora's actual campsite was another 2 miles deeper into the forest. The trail got progressively worse as we went, narrowing from a clear path to something barely visible between the massive cedar and fir trees. The canopy overhead was so thick that even though it was mid-morning, we needed flashlights to see properly. The forest around us felt wrong. Dead wrong. The silence had gotten even more oppressive, and there was a smell in the air that I couldn't identify, something organic and unpleasant, like meat that had been left out too long. Our radios started acting up, crackling with static whenever we tried to communicate with base. "Ethan," Melissa whispered, stopping suddenly. "Look at the trees." I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. Carved into the bark of several large trees were symbols I'd never seen before. Not random vandalism, precise, deliberate markings that looked almost ritualistic. They were fresh, the cuts still weeping sap. "Should we photograph these?" she asked. I was reaching for my camera when my radio crackled to life with Dale's voice, distorted by static. "Cornelius. Research site. What's your—" "Dale, you're breaking up. Say again." More static. Then nothing. I tried calling back several times, but the radio was dead. Melissa's radio was having the same problem. We were effectively cut off from communication, 8 miles into one of the most isolated sections of the Olympic National Park. We found Nora's research site 15 minutes later, and that's when everything I thought I knew about my job fell apart. Her camp was destroyed. Not damaged by weather or animals, systematically demolished. Her tent had been sliced open with what looked like a knife, the research equipment scattered and broken. But it wasn't random destruction. Someone had gone through her gear carefully, methodically. Papers were sorted into neat piles weighed down with rocks. Equipment was arranged in precise lines, and written in the dirt next to her ruined camp, in letters 2 feet tall, was a message. "The hunt begins." I've been in law enforcement long enough to know when a missing person case becomes something else entirely. This wasn't someone lost in the woods. This was an abduction, possibly worse. Someone had taken Nora, destroyed her camp, and left us a message. "We need to get out of here," Melissa said, her voice tight with fear. "We need to call for help." She was right, but as I reached for my radio again, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Somewhere in the forest around us, maybe 100 yards away, a woman was screaming. It wasn't a scream of surprise or pain. It was pure terror, raw and desperate, the sound of someone who knew they were about to die, and it was definitely human. "Nora!" I shouted, dropping my pack and running toward the sound. I know now that was exactly what he wanted me to do. The scream came again, from a different direction this time, then another, from somewhere else entirely. I stopped running, my heart hammering, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. 3 distinct screams, from 3 different locations, all sounding like the same voice. Melissa caught up with me, breathing hard. "That's impossible," she gasped. "How can she be in 3 places at once?" That's when I understood we weren't dealing with someone lost in the woods. We were dealing with someone who wanted us to think we were hearing Nora, someone who was using recorded sounds or had developed an ability to throw their voice, someone who was playing with us. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by that unnatural silence, but now I could feel eyes on us, the crawling sensation of being watched by something intelligent and malevolent. Somewhere in the trees around us, someone was studying us, learning our reactions, planning their next move. I pulled out my service weapon, a Glock 22 that I'd qualified with but never fired outside of training. My hands were shaking as I checked the safety. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Melissa whispered. "Someone's out there," I said. "Someone took Nora, and now they're hunting us." As if in response to my words, a new sound echoed through the forest. Slow, deliberate clapping. Someone was applauding our realization, mocking us for finally understanding the situation we were in. The clapping stopped and a voice called out from the darkness between the trees. A man's voice, calm and educated, with the slightest hint of a southern accent. "Very good, Ranger. You're smarter than the last ones." My blood went cold. The last ones. How many people had this man taken? How long had he been operating in my forest? "Where is Nora Whitfield?" I shouted back, trying to keep my voice steady. Laughter echoed from multiple directions, as if he was moving while he spoke, circling us. "Safe for now, but that depends entirely on how well you play the game." "What game?" Melissa called out, her own weapon drawn now. "The oldest game, darling. Predator and prey. Hunter and hunted. You have a 6-hour head start. When the sun sets, I come for you. If you can make it to the main trail by dawn, you win. If not..." The voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. "And Nora?" I demanded. "She's the prize for the winner, assuming there is one." That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with a kidnapper or even a killer. We were dealing with someone who had turned murder into entertainment, who got his thrills from hunting human beings like animals. And he'd been doing it in my park, under my watch, possibly for years. The voice came again, closer this time. "Oh, and Rangers? I should mention that I know these woods better than you do. I know your training, your protocols, your equipment. I know that your radios don't work past mile 7 on this trail and that your backup isn't coming for at least 4 hours. I know that Ranger Kovich is afraid of the dark, and that you, Cornelius, have never actually shot a man." How could he know these things? How long had he been watching us, studying us? "I also know," the voice continued, "that you're both going to try to be heroes. You're going to try to find Dr. Whitfield instead of running for safety. That's what makes you such excellent prey." The forest fell silent again, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I could almost feel crosshairs on my back. The weight of a predator's attention focused on us like a laser. My training hadn't prepared me for this. 6 years of dealing with lost hikers, injured climbers, and the occasional poacher. But nothing had prepared me for a human being who hunted other humans for sport. "We need to move," I whispered to Melissa. "Now." But as we turned to leave the destroyed campsite, I saw something that made my heart stop. Hanging from a tree branch 30 feet away was a piece of fabric. Blue fabric. The same color as the shirt Nora had been wearing in her research photos. It was stained with blood. That's when I understood that this wasn't just a game to him. It was a ritual. He'd done this before, probably many times. And the people who played his game didn't usually win. We started moving through the forest, but every step felt like a mistake. The undergrowth seemed to grab at our clothes. Roots appeared from nowhere to trip us, and branches scratched at our faces as if the forest itself was working against us. Behind us, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps, always just far enough away to be unsure, always seeming to come from a different direction. My flashlight started flickering after 30 minutes of walking. Melissa's died completely. We were stumbling through increasingly dense forest with failing equipment, being stalked by someone who obviously knew the terrain better than we did. Every shadow could hide an attacker. Every sound could be a trap. "There," Melissa whispered, pointing ahead. "I see light." It was a clearing, maybe 50 yards across, with what looked like an old hunting cabin in the center. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and warm yellow light spilled from the windows. It looked like salvation, like exactly what we needed. Shelter, warmth, possibly even a working radio or phone. But something about it felt wrong. Too convenient, too perfect. "It's a trap," I said. "It might be our only chance," Melissa replied. If we can get inside, barricade the doors. As we watched, the front door of the cabin opened, and a figure appeared in the doorway. A woman with dark hair wearing a blue shirt. Even from a distance, I could see that she was injured, favoring her left leg. "Nora," Melissa breathed. The woman in the doorway raised her hand weakly, as if asking for help. Then she collapsed, falling just outside the door. Every instinct I had told me it was a trap. But what if it wasn't? What if Nora had somehow escaped, made it to this cabin, and was genuinely hurt and calling for help? What if walking away meant leaving her to die? That's the thing about people like the man hunting us. They understand human nature better than we understand ourselves. They know we'll try to be heroes even when heroism means walking into an obvious trap. They count on our better angels to lead us into hell. Melissa started moving toward the cabin before I could stop her. "We have to help her," she said. I followed, knowing it was probably a mistake, knowing that we were doing exactly what our hunter wanted us to do. But I couldn't let Melissa walk into danger alone, and I couldn't live with myself if we left Nora to die. The woman on the ground was definitely Nora Whitfield. I recognized her from the photos her research partner had provided, but something was wrong with her eyes. They were wide with terror, darting frantically between us and the forest around the cabin. She was trying to say something, but no sound came out. As I knelt beside her, I saw why. Her throat had been cut. Not deeply enough to kill her, but enough to damage her vocal cords, to take away her ability to scream or call for help. The wound was fresh, still bleeding. "Jesus," Melissa whispered. "Who would do this?" That's when I noticed Nora's hands. They were moving, trying to form words in sign language. I didn't know much ASL, but I could make out what she was trying to tell us. TRAP. The cabin door slammed shut behind us with a sound like a gunshot. The windows, which had been glowing with warm light moments before, went dark simultaneously. And from somewhere inside the cabin came the sound of slow, mocking applause. "Bravo," the voice called out, muffled by the cabin walls. "Absolutely textbook. You walked right into it, just like the others." I spun around, weapon drawn, but the door wouldn't budge. It had been barred from the inside, and the windows were too high to reach. We were trapped in a clearing with no cover, no escape routes, and a wounded woman who couldn't speak. "The others?" I called out. "How many others?" "Does it matter?" the voice replied. "You're about to join them anyway." That's when the real terror began. Up until that moment, I'd been scared but still functioning, still thinking like a ranger and a law enforcement officer. But standing in that clearing, holding a dying woman while a madman mocked us from inside a cabin we couldn't reach, I felt my sanity starting to fray at the edges. The lights in the cabin came back on, but this time I could see what was really inside. Bodies. Dozens of them, hanging from the ceiling like meat in a slaughterhouse. Some were fresh, some were obviously old. All of them were wearing the kind of outdoor gear that hikers and researchers wore. All of them had probably walked into this same trap, trying to save someone just like we were trying to save Nora. Melissa saw them too, and started throwing up. The smell of death was overwhelming now, seeping out of the cabin like a physical presence. Nora was trying to move, trying to crawl away from the cabin, her eyes wild with the knowledge of what was coming. "You see," the voice continued conversationally, "most people assume that serial killers are disorganized, that they act on impulse. But that's only the stupid ones who get caught. The smart ones are methodical. They plan, they prepare, they find the perfect hunting ground, and they perfect their technique." A window opened on the second floor of the cabin, and I caught a glimpse of our tormentor. Tall, lean, with the kind of fitness that comes from military training. He was wearing camouflage clothing and a ghillie suit that would make him nearly invisible in the forest. But it was his eyes that I'll never forget. Cold, intelligent, completely lacking in human empathy. "I've been using Olympic National Park as my hunting preserve for 3 years now," he continued. 73 kills so far. Hikers, researchers, park personnel. People who came out here thinking they understood the wilderness, thinking they were safe because they knew how to read a map and tie a knot. 73 people. 73 human beings who had disappeared in my park while I went about my daily routine, completely oblivious to the predator operating in my territory. How many missing person reports had I filed? How many searches had I conducted looking for people who were already dead, hanging in this cabin like trophies? The beauty of hunting humans, the voice went on, is the intelligence factor. Animals act on instinct, but humans think. They problem solve. They make choices. Every decision creates new possibilities, new outcomes. It's like playing chess with living pieces. The window closed, and I heard footsteps inside the cabin moving downstairs. He was getting ready to come outside to begin the final phase of his hunt. I looked around desperately for some form of cover, some tactical advantage, but there was nothing. The clearing was perfectly designed for what he intended, an amphitheater for murder. Nora managed to grab my arm, her fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. She was pointing at something in the forest behind us, her eyes trying to communicate what her damaged throat couldn't say. I followed her gaze and saw it, a narrow trail leading away from the clearing, barely visible between the trees. An escape route? Maybe. I helped Nora to her feet, supporting most of her weight, and whispered to Melissa, "We run. When I say go, we run for that trail, and we don't stop no matter what happens." The cabin door opened. "Go!" We ran. Nora was dead weight in my arms, barely conscious, but I carried her anyway. Melissa was right behind us, and I could hear the sound of our pursuer emerging from the cabin, his boots hitting the ground with the measured pace of someone who wasn't in any hurry. He knew we couldn't get far carrying an injured woman. He knew the forest better than we did. He knew exactly how this would end. The trail Nora had spotted was even narrower than I'd realized, barely wide enough for one person. Tree branches whipped at our faces, and roots tried to trip us with every step. Behind us, I could hear him following, not running but walking steadily like he had all the time in the world. "You can't carry her forever," his voice called out through the trees. "She's bleeding out anyway. Leave her, and you might actually make it to sunrise." The temptation was real. Nora was getting heavier with every step. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and the blood from her throat wound was soaking into my shirt. Melissa was barely keeping up, exhausted from fear and exertion. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave her to die, even if it meant we all died together. That's when my training finally kicked in. 6 years of wilderness experience, of tracking lost hikers and reading terrain, of understanding how animals move through forest. If this man was hunting us like animals, then maybe I needed to start thinking like prey instead of like a human. I stopped running and listened. He was still behind us, maybe 50 yards back, moving steadily but not rushing. He was confident, maybe overconfident, and that might be the only advantage we had. "Melissa," I whispered, "can you carry Nora for a few minutes?" She nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. I transferred Nora's weight to her and pulled out my flashlight. The batteries were nearly dead, but it still worked. "Keep following this trail," I told her. "When you reach the next clearing, stop and wait for me. If I'm not there in 15 minutes, leave Nora and run for the main trail. Don't look back." "What are you going to do?" "Something stupid." I waited until they'd disappeared around a bend in the trail, then I doubled back. If our hunter was as arrogant as he seemed, if he was really treating this like a game, then maybe I could turn the tables on him. Maybe I could become the hunter instead of the hunted. I found a position about 20 yards from the trail, behind a fallen log that would give me some cover. I turned off my flashlight and waited, listening to the sound of footsteps getting closer. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure he'd hear it, but I forced myself to stay still, to wait for the right moment. He appeared on the trail exactly where I'd expected, moving with the confident stride of someone who owned the forest. In the moonlight, I could see him clearly for the first time. Mid-40s, military bearing, carrying what looked like a hunting rifle with a night scope. Professional gear, professional attitude. This wasn't some random psychopath. This was someone with training, someone who'd been a soldier or law enforcement before he became a killer. I waited until he was directly in front of my position, Then I turned on my flashlight and shined it directly in his eyes. He reacted exactly like a trained soldier would, dropped to one knee, rifle coming up to firing position, scanning for the source of the light. But the sudden brightness had destroyed his night vision, and by the time he located me behind the log, I was already moving. I crashed into him with everything I had. 6 years of frustration and fear and professional failure driving me forward. We went down hard, his rifle flying away into the underbrush. For a moment I thought I had him. I was wrong. He rolled with the impact, came up with a knife in his hand and slashed at my throat in one smooth motion. I jerked backward, feeling the blade pass inches from my jugular, and fell over the log I'd been hiding behind. "Not bad," he said, getting to his feet. "Better than most. You actually made me work for it." He was between me and the trail, between me and any chance of escape. I could see the knife in his hand. Military issue, designed for killing. My gun was somewhere in the leaves where I'd dropped it during the tackle. "But you made one critical mistake," he continued, walking toward me slowly. "You assumed I was alone." That's when I heard Melissa scream. The sound came from ahead on the trail, from the direction I'd sent her and Nora. A scream of pure terror cut off abruptly. Then silence. "My partner is very good at what he does," the man said. "He's been watching the trail, waiting for your friend to arrive at the clearing. By now she's probably hanging next to Dr. Whitfield." Partner. There were 2 of them. That's how they'd managed to operate for 3 years without getting caught. How they'd been able to take 73 people without leaving a trace. One to drive the prey, one to catch them when they ran. I felt something break inside me, some fundamental part of my humanity that couldn't process what was happening. Melissa was dead. Nora was probably dead too, and I was about to join them, another trophy in a madman's collection. But as he raised the knife, I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. Melissa's voice calling my name from somewhere deeper in the forest. Not a scream this time, but a shout of warning. "Ethan, behind you!" I rolled to the side just as something heavy crashed through the brush where I'd been lying. A second man, bigger than the first, carrying a machete that gleamed in the moonlight. He'd been trying to flank me while his partner kept me distracted. But Melissa's warning had saved my life. The second man's swing went wide, and I managed to get to my feet, putting a tree between me and both attackers. She's alive, I realized. Melissa's still alive. The first man laughed. "For now, but not for long. And neither are you." They started closing in from both sides, working together with the kind of coordination that comes from practice. These weren't just killers. They were a team. Professionals who'd perfected their technique through years of murder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my emergency whistle, the kind every park ranger carries for signaling. I blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal distress signal, as loud as I could. The sound echoed through the forest, bouncing off trees and rocks, carrying for miles. If there was anyone else out there, anyone at all, they'd know someone was in trouble. "That's not going to help you," the first man said. "We're 8 miles from the nearest trail and your backup isn't coming until morning." But I wasn't trying to call for help. I was buying time, and more importantly, I was sending a message to Melissa. The whistle blasts were Morse code, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. But also a signal we'd used during training exercises, a way to indicate your position when you couldn't use radio. From somewhere in the darkness ahead, I heard an answering whistle. 2 long blasts. Message received. The killers heard it too, and for the first time they looked uncertain. Their carefully planned hunt was becoming unpredictable, chaotic. The prey was fighting back, communicating, refusing to die quietly. That moment of uncertainty was all I needed. I dove for my gun, found it in the leaves where I'd dropped it, and came up firing. I'd never shot at a human being before, never even pointed my weapon at another person outside of training. But in that moment, with the image of 73 bodies hanging in that cabin burned into my mind, I didn't hesitate. The first shot went wide. The second caught the man with the machete in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third shot hit the first man's center mass, And he went down hard. The wounded man with the machete stumbled back into the forest, bleeding and cursing but still alive. I could have followed him, could have finished him off, but I could hear Melissa calling my name from the clearing ahead. She needed help, and I wasn't going to abandon her the way I'd been abandoned. I found her in a small clearing about 100 yards down the trail. She was hurt, cut on her arms and face, but alive. Nora was with her, unconscious but breathing. They'd barricaded themselves behind a fallen tree when they heard the second man approaching, and Melissa had managed to drive him off with a flare gun she'd remembered was in her emergency kit. "Is he dead?" she asked, looking back toward where I'd come from. "One of them is. The other got away." We couldn't stay in the clearing. The wounded man might come back, might have reinforcements, might decide to finish what they'd started. We had to get moving, had to reach the main trail before dawn. It took us 4 hours to cover the 8 miles back to civilization, carrying Nora between us, stopping every few minutes to listen for sounds of pursuit. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight. Melissa was in shock, functioning on adrenaline alone. But we made it. The investigation that followed was a nightmare. The FBI found the cabin, found the bodies, found evidence of killings going back 5 years, not 3. 87 victims in total, not 73. The man I'd shot was identified as Marcus Coleman, former Army Special Forces, dishonorably discharged for conduct issues. His partner was never found, never identified. They found my bullet in Coleman's chest, but they also found something that haunts me to this day. In his pocket was a detailed dossier on me, my work schedule, my home address, photos of my wife. He'd been studying me for months, learning my habits, preparing to make me his next victim. How many other park employees had files like that? How long had we all been living under the eyes of killers, never knowing how close death was? I tried to go back to work after the investigation concluded, tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But every shadow in the forest looked like a person hiding. Every sound could be footsteps. Every missing person report felt like a death sentence. The final straw came 3 months later. I was conducting a routine patrol when I found something that shouldn't have been there. A piece of fabric tied to a tree branch, exactly like the marker we'd found at Nora's campsite. Blue fabric, stained with what looked like blood. I radioed for backup and waited, my gun drawn, certain that Coleman's partner had returned to finish what they'd started. But when the other rangers arrived, there was nothing there. No fabric, no blood, no sign that anyone had been in the area. They found me sitting on the ground staring at an empty tree, holding my weapon and talking to shadows. That's when I knew I couldn't do the job anymore. That's when I knew the forest had taken something from me that I'd never get back. I submitted my resignation the next day and moved to Vermont a week later. I haven't been in a forest alone since. I probably never will again. Nora survived, though she never spoke again. The damage to her throat was too severe, and the psychological trauma was even worse. She moved back east too, started teaching at a small college in Massachusetts. We stay in touch sometimes, 2 survivors of something that shouldn't exist in a civilized world. Melissa left the Park Service too, became a police officer in Seattle. She says it helps to work somewhere that the monsters are at least human-shaped, where the dangers are obvious, and you can fight them with laws and handcuffs. But I know what she knows. What I know. What Nora knows but can't say. There are things in the wilderness that are worse than bears or cougars or getting lost. There are people who've given up their humanity entirely, who see other human beings as nothing more than animals to be hunted. And Marcus Coleman's partner is still out there somewhere. Still hunting. Still killing. The FBI task force was disbanded after 2 years with no leads. The case is officially closed, filed under solved, because they got one of the killers. But I know better. Every few months I check the missing person reports from national parks across the country. And every few months I see patterns that look familiar. Solo hikers disappearing without a trace. Research teams that miss their check-ins. Search and rescue operations that find gear but no bodies. The hunting season never really ends. It just moves to new territory. I live in Vermont now, where the mountains are gentle and the forests are small. where you can see the edges where there are houses and roads and civilization just over the next hill. My wife thinks I'm paranoid, that I need to let go of what happened in Washington. She doesn't understand that some experiences change you at a cellular level, that some knowledge can't be unlearned. But sometimes at 3 a.m, I wake up hearing sounds that shouldn't exist in these safe New England woods. Footsteps circling the house, voices calling my name from the tree line. The sound of slow, mocking applause echoing through the darkness. My therapist says it's PTSD, that my mind is replaying the trauma. Maybe she's right. But last week, I found something in my mailbox that wasn't there when I went to bed. No postmark, no return address. Just a photograph of my house taken from the woods behind our property, and written on the back in precise handwriting, "The hunt continues." I showed it to the local police, but what can they do? It's not technically a threat, just a photograph. Could be a prank, could be someone playing games. They took a report and said they'd keep an eye on the area. But I know what I know. I know that predators don't give up when they lose their prey. I know that some people view killing as an art form, a skill to be perfected over years of practice. And I know that Marcus Coleman's partner has had 3 years to plan his revenge, 3 years to study me the way I was studied before. I'm recording this testimony because if something happens to me, if I disappear the way 87 other people disappeared, I want someone to know the truth. I want people to understand that the wilderness isn't just dangerous because of natural hazards. There are human monsters out there who found the perfect hunting ground in our national parks, places where people go to disconnect from civilization, where they're isolated and vulnerable. The photograph in my mailbox wasn't the only message. 2 days ago, I found my spare car key missing from the magnetic box under the wheel well. Nothing else was touched. Nothing else was taken. Just the key. A message that he could have taken the car, could have gotten into the house, could have done anything he wanted. But he chose to leave me alive, to let me know he was there. He's playing with me the same way he played with all those other victims. Building the fear, creating anticipation, making the actual kill more satisfying when it finally comes. I understand the psychology now in a way I never did when I was just a ranger doing my job. My wife doesn't know about the photograph or the missing key. How do you tell someone you love that a serial killer has been watching your house, learning your routines, preparing to turn you into his next trophy? How do you explain that the safe life you've built together is just an illusion? That death has been circling you for 3 years? I've been carrying my gun again, checking the locks obsessively, staying awake until dawn watching the tree line behind our property. But I know it won't be enough. If this man could operate in Olympic National Park for 5 years without being caught, if he could study and kill 87 people without leaving a trace, then what chance do I have in a small Vermont town where no one even knows to look for him? The worst part is the waiting, not knowing when he'll make his move, not knowing how he'll do it. Will it be a home invasion in the middle of the night? Will I disappear on my way to work, found weeks later in some remote area of the Green Mountains? Or will I simply vanish one day, leaving my wife to wonder what happened, to file missing person reports that will never be solved? I think about calling the FBI, trying to reopen the investigation. But what would I tell them? That I received an anonymous photograph and lost a car key. They'd think I was paranoid, suffering from delayed PTSD, seeing threats that don't exist. And maybe they'd be right. Maybe my mind has finally snapped completely, and I'm imagining connections that aren't there. But when I close my eyes, I can still see Marcus Coleman's face in those final moments before I shot him. The cold intelligence in his eyes, the complete lack of human empathy, and I remember what he said about his partner, how good he was at what he did. Someone like that doesn't just give up. Someone like that doesn't let loose ends remain untied. There's something else I haven't told anyone, something I discovered while researching similar cases online. Missing person reports from other national parks, other wilderness areas, that follow the same pattern we saw in Olympic. Solo hikers vanishing without a trace, research teams missing their check-ins, gear found but no bodies recovered. Yellowstone, Grand Teton, Glacier, Rocky Mountain. Over the past 3 years, since Marcus Coleman died, the disappearances have been spreading across the country, always in remote areas, always involving experienced outdoors people who should have known better. The pattern is subtle, scattered across different states and jurisdictions, but it's there if you know how to look for it. He's been traveling, perfecting his technique, finding new hunting grounds, and now he's ready to complete unfinished business. I've started having the dreams again, the same ones that used to wake me up at 3 in the morning when we first moved to Vermont. But they're different now, more detailed. I dream about walking through the forest behind our house and finding a cabin that shouldn't be there, with smoke rising from the chimney and warm light spilling from the windows. In the dream, I know I shouldn't go inside, but I do anyway. The cabin is full of bodies just like the one in Olympic National Park, but these are different bodies, more recent victims, and hanging in the center, directly above a table set for two, is a noose waiting for me. I wake up from these dreams with the taste of metal in my mouth and the smell of death in my nostrils. My wife thinks I'm having nightmares, but I know better. These aren't dreams, they're previews. He's showing me what's coming, the same way he showed his other victims before he killed them. The psychological torture is part of the experience for him. The anticipation, the fear, the gradual breakdown of his victim's sanity before the final act. He's been studying me for 3 years, learning exactly how to break me down, how to make my death as satisfying as possible. But I'm not going to make it easy for him. If he wants me, he's going to have to come and get me. And when he does, I'll be ready. I've been practicing at the shooting range every day, improving my accuracy, my reaction time. I've installed motion sensors around the property, cameras that upload to cloud storage so there will be evidence if something happens to me. I've also written letters, to the FBI, to the media, to anyone who might listen, explaining everything I know about the Olympic National Park killings and the connection to disappearances in other parks. If I die, if I vanish, these letters will be mailed automatically. The truth will come out even if I'm not around to tell it. Most importantly, I've shared everything with Melissa and Nora. They know about the photograph, the missing key, the pattern of disappearances. If something happens to me, they'll know who was responsible. They'll make sure the investigation continues, that justice is finally served. Because that's what this is really about. Justice for 87 innocent people who went into the wilderness looking for adventure, for knowledge, for peace, and instead found a monster. Justice for families who never got answers, who spent years wondering what happened to their loved ones. Justice for a system that failed to protect people in places that should have been safe. The Olympic National Park case was officially closed, but the killing never stopped. It just moved to new locations, new hunting grounds, and it will continue until someone stops it. Until someone finds Coleman's partner and puts an end to this nightmare once and for all. I don't know if that someone is going to be me. I don't know if I'll survive long enough to see justice served, but I know I can't keep running, can't keep living in fear, can't let him continue to torture and kill innocent people while I hide in Vermont pretending to be safe. So I'm going back. Not to Olympic National Park. That would be too obvious, too easy for him. But to one of the other parks where disappearances have been reported, where the pattern suggests he's been operating. I'm going to set myself up as bait, draw him out into the open where he can be caught. It's probably suicide. He knows the wilderness better than I do, has more experience, more skill, more ruthlessness. But maybe, if I'm very lucky and very careful, I can turn the tables on him one more time. Maybe I can end this before anyone else has to die. My wife will never forgive me for this decision. She'll think I've lost my mind completely, that I'm throwing away our life together for some misguided quest for revenge. And maybe she's right. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe 3 years of fear and guilt and survivor's remorse have finally broken something essential in my brain. But I keep thinking about those 87 bodies hanging in that cabin, about all the families who never got closure, about the victims who died in terror while I went about my daily routine completely oblivious to their suffering. I think about Nora's damaged throat, about Melissa's nightmares, about my own cowardice in running away instead of staying to fight. Some debts can only be paid in blood. Some wrongs can only be made right through sacrifice, and some monsters can only be stopped by someone willing to become a monster themselves. If you're listening to this recording, if these words ever reach the public, then you'll know how my story ended. You'll know whether I succeeded in stopping him or whether I became just another victim in his collection. Either way, you'll know the truth about what happened in Olympic National Park, about what's still happening in wilderness areas across America. Don't let them close the investigation again. Don't let them pretend the problem is solved just because they caught one killer. There are others out there, predators who see our national parks as their personal hunting preserves, who view human beings as nothing more than sport. The wilderness should be a place of beauty and peace, not a slaughterhouse for human monsters. But as long as people like Coleman's partner are free to hunt, as long as they can operate without fear of consequences, no one is truly safe in the places we go to find ourselves. I'm finishing this recording now. Tomorrow morning I leave for Colorado. Rocky Mountain National Park has had 17 disappearances in the past 18 months that match the pattern. If he's there, I'll find him. If he's not, I'll keep looking until I do. My name is Ethan Cornelius. I was a forest ranger for 6 years before I learned that the real monsters aren't the ones with claws and fangs. They're the ones that look human, that smile and speak politely while they plan your death. They're the ones that turn our most beautiful places into hunting grounds, that corrupt the wilderness we're supposed to protect. If I don't make it back from Colorado, tell my wife I'm sorry. Tell her I love her, but that some things are more important than safety, more important than a quiet life in Vermont. Tell her that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to walk into its lair and face it on its own terms. And tell anyone who might be listening that the hunt isn't over. It's never over. As long as there are places where people can disappear without a trace, as long as there are predators who see killing as sport, the hunt continues. Be careful out there, trust your instincts, and remember that the most dangerous predator in any wilderness isn't the one with claws. It's the one with human intelligence and no human conscience. This is Ethan Cornelius, signing off. Whatever happens next, at least the truth is finally out there. At least someone will know what really happened in the forest where people go to find peace, and instead, find death. The recording ends here. 3 weeks later, Ethan Cornelius was reported missing during a solo hiking trip in Rocky Mountain National Park. His body was never found, but his rental car was discovered at a trailhead with all his gear still inside. The only unusual detail was a note left on the dashboard, written in precise handwriting that matched the message on the photograph he'd received in Vermont. The hunt is complete. The investigation into his disappearance was closed after 6 months with no leads. His wife received a modest life insurance payout and eventually moved back to her hometown in Oregon. Melissa Kovich and Nora Whitfield attended his memorial service, but neither spoke about what they knew regarding his real reason for going to Colorado. The disappearances in America's national parks continue. The pattern remains the same. Experienced outdoors people vanishing without a trace, gear found but no bodies recovered. The official statistics are buried in bureaucratic reports, dismissed as acceptable losses in dangerous terrain. But the families know better. The survivors know better. And somewhere in the wilderness, the hunt goes on.